on. Hopefully it'll be on in a minute. All the lights here are green. There we go. Hello coders, welcome to Tuesday morning. It is 7:36 British summertime. Apologies for being a few minutes late. I was making a cup of tea and also feeding cats. Today we're going to be focusing on the find routine for the status model of this PHP OOP course that I'm developing for FreeCodeCamp. The course will teach object-oriented programming without any frameworks, without any libraries, and we are using a testing library which is Codeception, and that's been going on quite well so far. We're using almost a TDD kind of approach to this project. It's not fully TDD. Most of it is, but it's not fully TDD. And last week we were working with some of the things to do with inserting records into the database using our model layer. This week I want to be focusing on the finding of those records. So we're going to be playing around with those pesky hydrators again. And we're going to be writing queries to find a record by a field such as an ID and that kind of thing. We're going to start by creating our failing test first, and then I'm going to talk through other various tests that we can do internally to test things like the actual query itself, and then the hydration of the records and so forth. I'm going to be streaming every day this week from like today, Tuesday, all the way up to Friday, around the same time, 7:30 BST. I'll try and put the events in as well. Also today, I want to be announcing a particular project that I've been building on Gatsby.js. So if you've been following along on Instagram and Twitter, you might have seen a couple of sneak previews of this. It's about the course that I'm doing, so I'm going to be announcing that later on in the stream. But for now, let's just get into the code. Let's start working on the find routines. This morning when I got in, I built the Docker machine, spanned that up, and then I just went inside the container, the web container, and I just ran the tests just to make sure that those were okay. I believe last week, there was an issue that I left around the insert or update. What I did to fix that was I changed the array values here. So that was the fix that I put in, and I did that after the stream, so that was sort of a post-stream fix. But today we're going to be focusing on the find routines, and we're going to be pretty much working in the status manager. We're going to be working on the status one first because the status is slightly lighter than the other tables. There isn't any sort of relationships between the tables. This is just a single status table. We have a find one here. This is what we put in as a sort of a code stub, and we're going to run row repository find one, passing in the ID, and then we're going to hydrate that, run the status hydrator, and then hydrate that, because that will become an array of all the raw data within that record. However, the find one I don't think is actually set up yet. Let's open this up. Yeah, this is completely empty. So this is what we need to do. We need to update that. There's also find one by, where you can pass in an array. There's also a find all by. We might not have all of these. I don't know. I haven't really decided yet. I was just building these as code stubs a few weeks back. Okay, so what I also want to do is go into the browser. Oops, I've already given that away. That's what I'm going to be announcing. But this is the issue that we're working on. This is issue 58 of the FreeCodeCamp PHP OOP repo within my PFWD profile here on GitHub. Issue 58, find and populate a status entity. That's pretty much what it needs to do. And that's what we're going to be working on today. Okay, so 58 is the issue number. So as before, I'm going to go back into the code here, and I'm going to just come out of the container, I'm going to just check what branches I've got because I haven't played with this in a few days. Okay, git branch. We are on the master branch, so that means I can do a git checkout -b, and the branch we want to create is 58, and it's status find. Let's just call that status find. Okay, so we've now switched to that branch, and we can now work through all the bits and pieces and the mechanics for that. So let's build the test first. That's the first thing we need to do. We need to build ourselves a failing test. So we've got db status entity sest here. I'm thinking about building a whole new test file because this is getting a little bit weighty. So I think I'm going to just copy that. I'm going to paste that in here. And this is going to be status find entity sest. So this is db, come on, db status find test. Okay, let's bring that down, make a little bit of room. Let's not make this any difficult than it needs to be. Let's just remove that because I don't need that in here. This is going to be the find, so this is find one by ID. Okay, test. So db status entity find one by ID. Okay, so because the nature of this of this test, we're tearing down the database and bringing that back up for every single test. And I discussed how I did this before within the Codeception config. We need to add a status into the database first, save it, and then pull it out again. So what we need to do, and I know that's a little bit sort of like a hefty test, right? But these are they're down as acceptance tests, but really they're more integration tests because you're testing the integration of the DB and the PHP layer, the model layer. So, okay, the first thing we need to do is we're going to create a new status, and then we're going to save that status in here, like so. I'm just going to tidy this up a little bit, I think. There we go. Just going to update the imports just so I don't have all of those crazy things in here. And okay, so that's the whole saving of that status. And what we want to do is pull that back. So we want to do found entity is equal to manager find one by, and you're passing in the ID. So I need to get the ID that was pulled back here. So I need to do saved entity is equal to this, and then the saved entity should have the ID. So get ID. So that's the found entity. Now, this is where we get into a bit of an issue because these are defined as acceptance tests, but they're actually integration tests. And the acceptance tests will do things like looking inside the database and sort of allowing the code to run various different pages at various different times. Because it's not an integration test, or defined as such from Codeception's point of view, you can't do things like assertions, which is a shame. You can't do things like this, assert, that kind of thing. If I had like this, oops, come on. I can run various things, execute. I can see in title. I can see element. I can pause. I can check that I'm on a subdomain. I can do all various bits and pieces, but you're not comparing things. You're not using any kind of assertions. You're not really trying to do that with an acceptance test. So I think the first thing I need to do, and something that I should have set up before the stream, is let's see if we can actually create these integration tests a little bit better, because then we've got the power to do that. So how does one create an integration test in Codeception? Okay, so I will spin up I'm just having a look, Codeception, and it's integration tests. Because there isn't, you need to first create an integration suite for this. It's more like a unit test. So, I mean, one could say I could do it as a unit test. So, what do I need to do? Configuration. You could also, yeah, okay, yeah. So it is definitely more like that, I think. So what we need to do is we need to create ourselves in the tests directory. We need to create an integration testing suite. So I'm just going to take a look at another project that I'm working on, which does have all of this stuff. So please bear with me just a second. If I can find it. Oh dear. Should have sorted this out in the stream beforehand. Let's pull that down. There she is. Okay. All right. Okay. So, okay. So it's slightly different because we're not using any kind of frameworks like Symfony or what have you. One thing we could do is we could play around with the... let's close that. We could play around with the unit tests. I might just try that first of all, just to see if we can get something working. Because really what we could do on the DB here is we could create, let's put that in here, we could create ourselves a test for that. The challenge is, of course, that this really isn't a SEST. This is a test. This is a unit test. This isn't a SEST. Whereas with the tests, they have the ability to do those assertions. So we can do DB DB status entity find. Okay, so that's what we're putting in, and you see here, this is what I mean. We can run these assertions because we're running off of the unit test here. So I'm just going to delete all of this. I'm going to have to wire up the mechanism that will allow me to do that, which is a bit annoying. But I didn't consider this beforehand. Yep. Okay. So that is not a unit tester. This is a codeception unit, and you get the tester in here. So, which means that we should be able to do something like this, assert, or we could even get the tester itself and get some helper bits and pieces from here. But we want to do assert same, and we want to do found entity, and we do get name is the same. Let's just bring this out a little bit, because this is where we want to sort of end up with. We want to do found, and then we want to do saved entity is get name. Make sure that the found entity is the same as the saved entity, and we can do that. For things like the name. We can also do things for the internal name as well. So we can do get internal name. We can also do the IDs as well if we wanted to, and the dates. But that's essentially where we want to sort of like land. It's sort of running this sort of thing where we first create the entity, we put that into the database, and then we save it. But the thing is that I'm going to need to play around a little bit with the connections. Let's just play with, because we don't pass anything in here. And let's just see, that's not wired up either. Let's just do new connection. That should have gone up there. Yep. And this is different. DB entity status entity find test. This isn't, we're not passing that in as a parameter. But we're moving away from the actual essence of what a unit test is, because we're testing a unit in the sense of we're testing that the found entity name is the same as the saved entity name, but we're moving away from the fact that we're not testing a single unit of work. We're actually testing the integration of both creating a new entity, then we are creating a connection, we're then creating a manager, we're then saving that entity, then we're pulling that out of the database. So it's an awful lot of work. It's kind of like a sort of a big piece of testing going on here. And what I've done previously is I've tested these individual components in unit tests. So this is more of an integration test, really, sort of integrating all of those units of work together. So it really shouldn't be in the folder unit, to be fair. And this is going to fail anyway, because the thing is, if I remove that from here, let's delete that, bye-bye, is that I need to set this up. So in acceptance suite, we have all of this stuff, right? So I'm going to need to put all of this stuff again into the unit. I'm not sure that's possible. This is why I usually, put this in an integration thing. However, we could supply modules to this. Modules. I'm just going to take a slurp of the tea and then I'll have a think. Because usually what I would have is an integration suite.yaml here. Okay, I don't really want this to go in. Let's just run this first. Let's just copy all of this, put this in the units, and then if this works, I'll create this as a integration test, I think. Because I mean, what we're doing here is we are throwing up an overhead. We're adding an overhead to the units, to all the units, and that's not clever. That's not clever. So let's see. Let's put those. In here, we certainly don't need to have the PHP browser. That's a big overhead. Ow. So we don't need to have that, nor do we need to have acceptance. All right, that's what it was. I'm going to just comment that out. And this is what it's going to be converted to. Okay, so I know that this isn't pretty. I mean, you're probably looking at this and going, why have you got a unit in here when you're running against the database? Don't run databases against unit tests against databases. This is kind of the point I want to make. And here I am doing it. Because this means that we're going to be dumping and connecting all this. This just doesn't look good, does it? This doesn't look good. I can single out a test, can't I, using the groups? So let's see if this even works. So let's grab that. Copy, 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 copy. Where are you? Copy. There we go. We go back into the terminal, which has disappeared. So I'm going to have a look and see where that's gone. Is that in View, Tool, Windows, Terminal, or Command F12? Let's get back into the old bash thing, and in the corner of my eye, I can see that FunkDev. Thank you very much for following. I do appreciate it. Hello, FunkDev. How are you doing? Hope you're doing well, and fingers crossed this test is going to run. Yeah, thank you very much for following, FunkDev. That's fantastic. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Let's see. We're now in it. You could tell I'm nervous about this because I'm sort of trying to not do it. Right. So let's see if we can run this. This is now running a unit test, -G, and we want to focus on this thing here. No tests are executed, so that's a bad start, isn't it? This is what it should be doing. Right, so unit test -G db status entity find one by ID. Oh dear. Okay, can it find any? Have I screwed up the config so bad that it can't find any tests? No, it can find tests. Okay, fine. So it just can't find that one for some reason. Oh, it's because. Yeah, can you see the names of these things are the other way around? So instead of find one by ID test, this needs to be test default. So this needs to be test at the front. So test find one by. So it's just a nuance with codeception and how their naming conventions. And I think that needs to be a lowercase t, and this needs to be an uppercase F for camel case. It makes sense, really, you know. It makes sense doing it like that. Okay, so here we go. This has failed spectacularly. Find one on null. So let's have a little look and see. Let's bring that out so I can actually see what's going on. On null, so find one on null. So this is null for some reason. So status manager connection null. That's peculiar. Okay, so we actually went into the status manager, you can see here. Okay, so this might work. This might work. This might be a little dirty hack. Okay, let's try it. Let's give it a whirl, shall we? Status manager 39. Find one. It is 39 on null. Find one, so we can't find the repo. Repo. Have I not? No, I haven't injected the repository into here. So yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? That is the problem, because this is null. This repo, I've defined it up here, obviously, right? But I haven't actually. Oops, that's my watch telling me to move. There you go. So this is the. So I haven't done any dependency injection to this. So how do we do that? We can pass that in, but is there any dependencies upon the repository? This is where it gets a little bit confusing. There is a connection. Yeah, okay. I see what's going on here. Connection. The problem abstract repository. No, there is no dependency on there. Right. Okay. Okay. Let's... my screen's too small. I need to see... I've put this in presentation mode, so it's too teeny weeny, too tiny. Status manager, that's where we're on. Repository isn't being injected into here. So let's see if we can do that. Now, obviously, this is going to break the other ones, the other tests. So I'm going to have to fix those as well. Let's just make that a little bit smaller so I can see. Repository. So this is repository, and we can do this. Repository equals repository, like that, and we can put in the parameter here. Like so. Now we can do a find one. So that will inject this. We can run the find one against the repository. Obviously, that's completely blank, which is fine because we'll worry about that down the road. The interesting thing I'm going to have to deal with, though, is the fact that we're injecting the connection into this manager and the repository into this manager. Really, what we need to be doing is injecting the connection into the repository, because this is repository is where the guts of all of this stuff should live in. So I might need to restructure this a slight bit, which is going to affect all the other bits and pieces that I've done. But this is just an architectural decision, really. Okay, so let's go back to the test then. Let's at least get this to try and run. What we need to do is pass that in. Can you see that's gone like a yellow here? We need to create a repository. So repository is equal to, and this is new status and I'm trying to find status manager, status repository. Okay. The other issue is that I've called this status manager with the manager on the end, and this is just called status for the repository. This really needs to be status repository. So I'm just gonna in the use statements here, we can do use and then that as status repository. Because I will eventually get around to renaming this, and again, that needs to be status entity just to tidy this all up. I will get around to renaming all of this, but for now, though, we can just put in call that as status repo, which means that, whoops, I should be able to do that. So this is now instantiating a new repository, and then I can pass this in, like so. Okay, so now we've put that in, and now we can run the save of the manager, and then we can run the find. And again, this is going to fail because it hopefully will not have this error, but it will fail because it's just it's going to be returning blank. So let's see if that does anything. Here we've got an error. So argument 1 passed to status hydrate must be an instance. Must be a type of an array, but null is given, called in status manager on line 42. This is the issue that we want to get to, because of course if we do find one and find one here, this is just going to be completely this is going to be returning null. So really this status needs to return a status. I'm going to just change this now to a status repository, just to sort that out. Actually, no, I'll leave it. I'll leave it as is. No. I will change it. I'll change it now. It needs to be done. So I've gone and changed that file. I need to go and fix the Where have I put that? Manager, repository, type, status. That should be, and I'm going to have to do the others for the customer and the invoice, but I'll probably do them when I get to that point, which now means that in the test itself, I can change that to be the repository, and we no longer need to have this as bit here, and it should work as it has done. Right, so what's going on here? That is expected type status, but so I actually have to change this part here. This needs to be a status repository. Now really this could be an interface, to be honest, rather than a actual concrete class. Also the repositories, they do need to have the connection added to them, so that we're extending an abstract repository at the moment, which is fine, but we should also really be passing in the connection, which I do appreciate is going to break a lot of things, because I've put the connection on at the point of the manager rather than the point of the repository. Which is a bit silly of me, really. To be honest, all of this stuff, the actual DB connection, stuff like that, needs to be done at the level of the repository, not the level of the manager. The manager should only have the responsibility of calling upon the repository, getting the bits and pieces, whether it's saving, whether it's finding, and then hydrating and returning those things. It shouldn't have any knowledge of how the database is actually connected. The idea being is that these repositories could be MySQL, they could be, MySQL, they could be MongoDB, they could be whatever. It should be agnostic to the connection, including the manager. The manager shouldn't be aware of that either. But in doing so, we're breaking this because we have a dependency upon the connection. Manager requires the connection, and it requires that because of this save routine, because we do the connection here, I believe. There we go, DB open, which is not what we need to do. So let's see if I can hack this up a little bit further. Let's remove that connection, and we're going to remove that from here. Oh, no. There we go. Sorry, PHP Storm had a bit of a funny. I think I pressed the wrong button. Okay, so that's now pushing that in, which means that in the repository we need to have a public function construct, and we need to pass in the connection in this. Okay, and then we do this. Sorry, what am I doing? Not in there. We do private connection. We do this. Connection is equal to connection, and we can give that a little bit of PHP block goodness. There we go. Okay. So now what we can do is we can now do the find one and all that stuff from here, building in the actual query, running the query builder at this point, rather from the manager itself. So there's a couple of things that I've broken with the status manager that I just need to tidy up. I just want to fix before I even get into the other realms of all the other bits and pieces. So first of all, we remove that because that's no longer going to be injected here. We're injecting it from at the level of the repository. I'm not sure why that needs to be status. Beg your pardon. That needs to be status repository, and then this that's fine. We'll leave that. But this is the issue here. Where we do all of this stuff. So what I'm thinking of doing is putting this logic, the actual save logic, into the repository, perhaps. So we could do something along the lines of this repository and then maybe persist or something, or save. Let's just do save, keep it the same. And then what we do is we pass in the entity, what it is that we wish to save, and then we deal with the SQL and we deal with all the other bits and pieces up here. So I'm going to have to hack this up, aren't I? Which is a bit annoying. And this is also going to return the entity. Okay, so we get the data, we then get the table name. This needs to be done. This needs to be done in here. So really, that needs to be the entity that we're passing through. Yeah. Okay. Let's just copy all of this, including that, into the repository. Let's just create a new save routine. Save, because really the managers are more, in my opinion, they're more like sort of, decorators, I suppose, to the actual mechanics behind the saving and so forth. Okay. So we get the entity, and the entity is the status entity, and this is the entity name. Okay, so then it does all of this stuff. It works out whether or not there is an ID. It does a query build to get the insert or update. Does all of this magic, and then it returns the entity. So really, from the manager's perspective, the save is exceptionally light. It is just entity, this repository, and then we're saving that back into the repository like so. And this should be saved. Let's just call this better, saved entity. And we're returning the saved entity. This is essentially what I want these managers to look like. They're very sort of light, that you put something in the input, and then they deal with that, and then they spit it out on the output. So this is the processing part for these managers. Very light, very sort of, very kind of only a couple of lines, nothing more than that. They're actually sort of hiding the mechanics, if you will, of all of this. So on save here, we're actually dealing with the heavy work within here. And then likewise with the fine ones and all of this stuff, we can do this. Okay, so I've properly broken this. So let's go to the DB here. We need to pass in the connection into the repository. We need to remove the connection from here, and we need to replace that with the repository. So I think that now wires that up. So if I hit save, let's see, do I get any other errors other than the one we've just had? Argument 1 passed to hydrate must be a type of an array, null is given. So no, that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly fine. Okay, so now we hit the find one. So now we hit this one here. So this is going to return. This is going to return either an array, or it's going to return null. I think actually what we could do is we could even work on the hydrators within here too. Yeah, okay. So one thing I need to work on is the actual query itself. So the query is the selecting all, but this really needs to return. We need to fix this with data return because it shouldn't be an array. So let me just think about that just for a second. Manager. Let's copy that for a minute. So essentially we have query or SQL. This goes off and does something to build that SQL. Then we do the actual query runner, which is actually going to run the SQL, and it's going to do something, and then that's going to return an array of for that record, and then that record, or row I should call it, is going to go into the hydrator and hydrate that, and that will return be returned. So that's essentially the mechanism that we're working on. And so this is going to go off and do something else. And then here we have if row, we can do entity here is equal to null. And then if we find the row, then we do that like this. And we can do entity is equal to hydrate based on the row, and then we return the entity. That means, therefore, that the return is going to be either null or an actual status entity. Yeah. So this is the stuff that we need to play with. This is the stuff that we need to work on the mechanics with. Let's just go back to the... So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to comment that out, just to sort that out. And then in the manager itself, so this is now going to be an entity. That's returned. We're not going to worry about this because that's already handled within the row. And this is going to return a null or a status. So this is null or a status. Okay. Okay, let's just take another look at this. Let's just do row is equal to false for now. Okay, run the test. Okay, call to member get name on null. So we are now returning null, which means that I can actually run a test itself on something that doesn't exist. That's probably a good sort of failing test to put in, I think. So let's put in find one by null that does not exist. And we can do this by not creating and saving the entity, by just creating an entity without saving it. So we do need to have the manager, we do need to have that, but we just remove the save. And we can do found entity, passing in entity get by ID. We haven't put it specified an ID, so that should fail. But we can do this assert, and we can do this assert. Can we do is? Is assert null on found entity. There we go. Okay, so this is this what I've done essentially here is we don't even need to have that. We're creating a new entity and then we're just going to try and find it. So we could do entity set ID, and let's just do 5001. Right, so we set that ID. This is completely random. We're not saving the entity at all, but we are then running the find one, and we are trying to find an entity of that, and then that returns null. Now I know that the SQL hasn't been added yet, so I know that this isn't actually going to be running any kind of queries, but when it does, we want to make sure that this is actually not finding anything. So let's do find one by ID, not exists. So let's do db status, db status. Okay, so let's run this one and see what's going on. Oops, I don't think that copied through. Yep, so that has worked because we are returning null. So this is checking the data type that gets returned when we do the find one. Okay, cool. So the next thing is to work on this one a little bit more. Oh, that didn't copy through either. Control C, Control V. Thank you, PHP Storm. There we go. Okay. Wonderful. Okay, so we need to now wire up the SQL, and the SQL in the find one here needs to be something along the lines of this. So we do, whoops, select all from, and then it's the table of status where ID is equal to, whoops, the ID that we've supplied. Let's just put that in double quotes. Oh, come on. Thank you. Right. So that's the SQL that we should be running, and then we do the query runner. Now we've got a mechanism here. If I went down to here, we have a QueryBuilder, and we pass in all these bits and pieces. So this means that I can create a QueryBuilder specifically for this. Come on, there we go. So this is the QueryBuilder that does the updates and the inserts, but we should also do a QueryBuilder for the select as well. So let's do a public static function, and this is find by ID. And what we do is we pass in the table name, we pass in the ID, and I think that should hopefully be that. So in, where are we? Status man repository. We can take that. We can go into here. That becomes our SQL. So select all from, that becomes the table itself. Where ID is equal to, and then this. Okay, which means that now I can use this in other things. I'm just gonna, I haven't written a unit test for this yet, so I must do that. Let's do that in db QueryBuilder test. In here, let's do, what have I called this? Test insert or update, test insert or update, test update. So, okay. So this is just public function test find one by ID. And the expected string is what we're expecting up in the I've lost it now. Sorry, find one by, it's this. This is the expected string. So that can go, and we can put that back into here. So this becomes expected. And we can do SQL is equal to QueryBuilder, find one by ID, passing in the table of status and the ID of 4. So that needs to change to, of course, be 4. Like that. Okay, so now we can check that that is the same. And let's just put some comments around this and then put some groupings. So what did I call this? Let's just copy all of that, to be honest. Bring that down. So this is QueryBuilder find one by ID. Okay, let's run that test quickly. See if that runs. Which does. Excellent. So that's good. It's slowly building you up confidence with the with what we're doing. When you're working on projects like this and you are hacking things about, changing things, resculpting things as you go, it's always good to have these tests, even though you kind of know that they're going to work. But it's good because when you redo these tests in the future, you know that you're not breaking the existing stuff. Okay. So that's that. So find one. So now we can do we can now do our SQL is equal to insert, QueryBuilder, I should say. Find one by ID, passing in the table name, which is status. Passing in the ID, which is ID. So that will return our SQL. Now we need to run that query. So if we're taking a look now at the save routine, taking a look at how that query gets executed. So we could execute the query like that. Let's see. So we opened up the connection, and remember this is running for singleton. So the connection will still be alive if it's still there. If not, a new one will be created. So we can do dbcon is equal to this connection open dbcon, and then we could do execute, I think. Can we? Let's have a look. I just haven't. Oh, no, we do need to run a query, obviously, which is the SQL. Let me scroll to the bottom, just see how that's working down here. So we do a prepare, and then we do an execute. So the preparing, and we do an execute. So maybe we need to change that SQL a little bit to use those, to actually prepare that. dbcon, let me see that. dbcon is equal to this connection. Status statement, then we prepare. Okay, sorry. Now I'm with you. All right, so status, then we do a dbcon of the preparation. We don't need to do that. And then we do an execute of the data here. So the data at this point needs to be something like ID and then ID, like that, which means that in the query we need to change that a little bit. So let's do this needs to be select all from table where question mark is equal to question mark, because we need to prepare this. Whoopsie, come on. Find, so really that should be called find one by, and we're passing in the table name, where that is equal to that. Don't need those. Let's see, let's scroll up a little bit. That is obviously this, where question mark, I think that's correct. Just having a look where that is equal to this. Is that correct? All right, let's give it a go. So we no longer need to have that. I'm going to just change the test a minute. That should be where question mark is equal to question mark. Okay, let's run that test again. Which one was it? Was it that one? Call to member undefined db find one by ID. What's going on here? db find one db query builder find one. Oh, sorry, that should be find one by. There we go. And it's really not find one, is it? It's find by. It's not find. Well, let's just leave it like that. But really, we're doing a select all, so it's not really a find one. Okay, so this is saying that null is identical. So that's saying that the SQL that we've returned. Oh, why have I commented that out? That's silly. There we go. Okay, all right. Okay, so now in the actual test itself, when we do find one, we prepare it. This should be find one by, passing in the status. We don't need to put in the ID because that's handled when we prepare this. That becomes the statement, and then from the statement we do the execute. Whoops, and then we return the thing that has been executed. So I'm just going to double check that. What gets returned when we do that? Just a Boolean. So that's not what we need to do, is it? That's not what we want to do. Not at all. Not at all. I've been copying code too much. Right. Yeah, we need to do a fetch. Yep, we need to do a fetch. A fetch. So instead of an execute, we need to do a fetch. And this becomes a PDO statement. So that becomes the row. Okay, let's see, and let's just see what happens when we run this. I haven't used PDO in a long time. It shows how much I use or rely on things like Doctrine to do all this stuff for me. It's a shame, really. Whoops, that didn't copy across. Copy. Control C, Control V. Oh, that still didn't copy across. There we go. Okay, so we have an error here, and this is because expects parameter 1 to be an int, but an array has been given. Okay, so there is something fundamentally flawed with this. So fetch here, requires an integer, but an array has been given. This is because, this is because in execute, this needs to be execute, not as in, so we've prepared it, right? But we need to execute it, and then we need to do a fetch. So we do need to do statement execute, and we pass in the array here, like that. And then we do a fetch, like that. And then we do a fetch. Move that back there. But the fetch doesn't have anything in here. Or it can do, but we don't need to. And then that should return the row, hopefully. So let's scroll up. Okay, PDO statement SQL invalid parameter number of bound parameters done. So we've fiddled with this one before, haven't we? The number of bound parameters. I think it's because ID here needs to be sorted out. So excuse me. We should really work on bounded parameters, to be honest, rather than just question marks, because that's a little daft, isn't it? I mean, what we could do, though, just to get this wired up and tested is we could just remove that. Okay, let's see. Okay, that's still having a little bit of a cry. So let's use bounded parameters. Let's change all of this to be using bounded parameters, I think. So that should return ID. ID equals question mark. ID equals, and then, sorry, ID. That's what we need because we're using bounded parameters now. Okay, so I will need to fix that test at some point. And there we go. We have hydrated it, and we've ran that test, and we've got that back. So that's the find routine. I just want to fiddle around a little bit because I've gone and broken the QueryBuilder, because this is now bounded parameters, and I think I'm going to use bounded parameters rather than these question marks, because these unbounded parameters they're going to get confusing, I think. Okay, so we need to do that. This is a test, isn't it? So find one by. Okay, so let's see. Can we do DB query test? Find one by QueryBuilder. Okay, cool. So that's correct. Okay, so yeah, that has sorted that. We can now actually pull a status out of the manager, which in theory goes and pulls it out of the repository based upon the ID that we supplied, which is pretty awesome. I'm going to just run all of the tests, all of the unit tests. I just want to make sure that all the unit tests are working. You can tell it's slower now, and this is because we're actually, for each one of these tests, it's stupid, but for each one of these tests we are manipulating the database. This is why these need to be integration tests and not unit tests. So I will be playing around with that, I think. But we've got 87, that's all passed. Let's just check that we have the DB tests running. Whoops, what did I done? Run DB. DB could not be found. Oh. -G. So I think there's going to be, sorry, this is, it's acceptance, not DB. I'm thinking of another project. So some of these are going to fail, and this is because I've messed around with the Well, some of these are going to be failing anyway because we had failing tests with the 404s of the pages. But the ones that I want to focus on, GDB, are the database tests. And there's 3 failures here. And this is because we have messed around with the wiring of the thingy. I'm just having a look at the time. I'm going to just see if I can fix those first before I shoot off. The reason why we've broken this is because in the tests, where are we? In acceptance tests, in the status here, sorry, status entity test, we've broken the managers quite a bit. Quite a fair bit, because if we go back to this, what we're doing is we're now injecting the repository into the manager. So this is what we need to do, and really there's a lot of duplication here, a lot of duplicated code. So really this needs to be in another sort of a method, but just for speed's sake, I'm just going to put this in. So in the manager, where did they go? Where did they go? Acceptance. Here we go. Status. So there's 3 of them. There is, let's scroll to the top. There is this one here. This needs to be now that. The other one is this one. That needs to be changed to that. The other one is, or maybe that was it. 1, 2. I thought there was 3 of them that were breaking. Let me just run that and see what's going on. There's one. There's one more, and that is in DB invoice entity test. Insert with status test. Something's not right there. What's going on with that? That could be a whole different issue. Must be an instance of app status repository. Okay. Okay, so this is invoice test on line 87. Invoice cest on line 87. Here we go, status manager. Yep, that needs to be changed too. So there's an awful lot of code duplication here. Whoops, I shouldn't actually be doing that, should I? There's an awful lot of code duplication here, which isn't good. So I need to do a little bit of refactoring to tidy this up. But we don't have time for that today, unfortunately. Where did that 87? I'm not even in the right file, am I? Invoice. One thing I want to do though is just is to split out these tests to be unit tests and integration tests separately. I don't want to be tearing down the database every time I do a unit test just because I'm checking whether or not a string is the same as equal to another string. Let's see if that now runs. Wonderful, and let's just run all the units again. Come on. God, this is taking ages, isn't it? This is taking really bad. This is not good. Right, 87. Okay, let's just run everything. I think we should have 2 failures. They should be acceptance tests, and these are old failures from the 404 page, which I will be addressing once we get to the that. Yeah, 2 failures. These are the 404 ones, I'm sure of it. Yeah, title was not found on the 404 page. Nothing massive, nothing major. At this stage of the game, I haven't got to the point where we're dealing with views and stuff, so I'm going to be focusing on that later. But we've got 102 tests now, 199 assertions and 2 failures. That's not so bad. Tomorrow's stream, I'm going to see if I can get the integration tests to run. I want to separate the integrations and the unit tests. Unit tests should not be touching the database. It should be integration tests. So we're going to tidy that up. Then we're going to be moving on to the customer thing as well. So doing the same thing for the customer, and then we're going to be working on the invoice and the invoice item as well. Before I shoot off, I want to do a little quick announcement on one of the a Gatsby.js site that I've been building for this course. So I'm just going to make sure I've got all the ducks in a row. Let's just remove all those. Here we go. This is learnobjectorientedphp.com. This website is built in Gatsby.js. Excuse me. I'll put a link in the show notes below and on the chat here. I'll just put that in the chat so we don't copy that in. This is the site. And this website will have, once I get around to doing the the FreeCodeCamp, I was going to call it Code Free, the FreeCodeCamp course, the object-oriented course that I'm doing, that this this project is actually, we'll be building off of. Once I do that, I'm going to embed that into this site. So this is the homepage. We'll have that course here, but also, if I click on the live coding of this course, then you can actually click through all of the previous live streams. They're archived because, of course, Twitch unfortunately deletes the archive after 2 weeks, and I think this is sort of this could be quite valuable stuff for people learning how to build a project like this. So at the moment, it goes all the way up to episode 26, and we're on 34, I think. So there is some more that I need to put through. But this is now up and running, and this website is running on Gatsby.js. I've got a whole video coming soon where I'm demonstrating how I've deployed this, and I've deployed this website to Hostinger. Hostinger are sponsoring these streams. Hostinger at the moment has a fantastic deal on. It's 82% off web hosting plus a free domain. And if you use the discount code Peter Fisher, you get a further 15% off. That's hostinger.com/Peter Fisher. And you can also click on these banners here as well to access that deal too. So thank you very much, Hostinger, for sponsoring the streams. And I also want to mention that on the podcast last Friday, we had Adam Argyle, who works at Google Chrome. He's a Google Chrome CSS, working Google Chrome CSS developer relations, and we had a fantastic chat that I've recorded, and that's on the podcast, howtocodewell.fm, where we talk about the future of the web, CSS, PWAs, all of that good stuff, and also what it's like working at Google as a developer in developer relations as well, which was fantastic. We've got another podcast coming this Friday as well, so do check that out if you haven't done so on Spotify, iTunes, the Google Play podcast thing, Stitcher, and all of that other good stuff. So do check that out, and also follow me on Twitter at howtocodewell as well, because I announce all of these things on there. But this is learnobjectorientedphp.com. This will be home to that course here, and I can show you that there's be teaching the object-oriented fundamentals, visibility scopes, objects and classes, object inheritance, data types, design patterns, and more. And then how we're actually going to, the actual application that we're building is an invoicing website. It's using PHP and MySQL. It's in a Docker environment using TDD kind of, and it's on GitHub and available on live streams on Twitch, and there's no frameworks or libraries at all apart from Codeception. So there we go. That is that website that I've been sort of talking about in the background for the past few weeks, running Gatsby.js, and that Gatsby.js has been a fantastic static site generator to work with. So do check that out if you're interested in static site generators. Gatsby is quite nice. I've also got experience in things like Sculpin and Jekyll and other ones like that too, but the way Gatsby allows you to handle GraphQL is quite nice. So yeah, cool. I will shoot off. I've got some work that I need to get on with, but thanks ever so much for watching. Happy coding, everyone. I'll see you again soon. Cheers. Goodbye.